Welcome everyone to Click Moments, where the right information at the right time is a portal from where you are to where you want to be. And I'm your host, Beth Orr, and I have my partner, Bridget Querns, here today to be able to assist me in a conversation about burnout and compassion fatigue and some symptoms that we see that even surpass those two types of um, challenges that we have when we're facing difficult work and chronic stress. So, Bridget, I asked you to be here today because one of the things I feel is really hard is when I'm reflecting back on a season in my life when I had incredible burnout, and I would even actually describe it when I look back on it now, I can see that I had some PTSD type symptoms. When I look back on this time, I think sometimes having somebody else's perspective or line of sight to ask questions is extremely valuable. I'm going to share what I feel like is significant given my line of sight, but I think you're one of the best question people that I've ever met. And I think that you ask really engaging and insightful questions. So I invited you because I really want to give an expansive discussion, not just regurgitate all the things that we know about these topics, but I really want to give people an opportunity to ask themselves questions about where they're at being engaged in whatever it is that they're doing in their life.
Mhm. So when you invited me to do this months ago, you had shared a video with me that you recorded
Mm.
when you were in the thick of burnout. And my initial thought was just when you thought to record that video, why did you do it? And what was your thought process around capturing yourself at that point?
I had this shirt on today. I haven't felt that in a long time. That I bring hope to people in my work anymore. I'm so burnt out. Compassion fatigue is a real thing. I want to feel value in my work again. Challenge, excitement, connection. Like I'm making a difference. It's been 25 years that I've worked with mental health and homeless and trauma, and I can't do it anymore. I need to do something else. My heart has been breaking.
Yeah, so this was around 2019 or 2020, maybe 2020. And it was, I think it was like some part of me, honestly, if I'm just honest, like there's some part of me that knew that this was an important pivotal moment, and I didn't know what to do from there. I was scared. Like, you guys are gonna get an opportunity to see this video. We're gonna, or by we, I mean Bridget. She's the skill person here. Bridget's gonna integrate it into the to this video, and I'm actually going to vulnerably share this moment with you. And what I will say is that when people are feeling burnout, we're so ashamed. We're so ashamed by not being okay. And as a leader in this organization who was responsible for a lot of people being okay, shame that I felt at not being okay, the fear that I had that my not being okay would translate to some part of our program not being okay, given the importance of what we were doing in homeless services. I felt this responsibility and I took it seriously, and I was doing all the self care, everything that I was supposed to do. I was taking the vacations, I had a great attitude, and yet it's still all the things that I knew to do weren't working. And so some part of me, I think, wanted to take a video and say, maybe I'll see something that I don't see that'll give me a clue. Maybe if I record this, maybe it'll have some meaning at some point, or it'll click within me what I need to do different. And I was so embarrassed when I first started to watch it after I took the video that I couldn't even watch it. I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed. It just like it doubled me down on the shame. And then eventually I looked at that video and what it told me was not this. I don't want to feel like this. It was almost like a wake up call when I could finally look at it and I had done some things between that moment and that realization that got my body and my brain online, and it gave me just enough distance from it to go, "Uh-uh. If this is where you're at, then you've gotta pivot." And so, I think it was just, like, some deeper, wiser part of me that, like, knew to do it, and retrospectively, I can ascribe some meaning, but in that moment, I just did it. Had no idea where it was gonna go. I just knew that I knew other people who were feeling also burnout, and so I suspected they too were crying like I was crying.
Mm.
But because we don't do that with each other openly, I couldn't in that moment, I wasn't in a space to be my highest self and the version of me that was willing to share that. I just felt too much shame, and I couldn't have even if one person had said, "What's wrong with you?" I would have crumbled.
Mm.
So I couldn't have shared it at that time. But retrospectively now, if 1,000 people said, "What's wrong with you?" I'd be like, "Oh, you don't understand. Obviously, you've never been there." Like, there's a lot of things I would feel now, but it wouldn't be shame, right? So, yeah, I share it now. I look at it, and I've really had this desire to share because I had somebody mention to me today that we're beyond the scary part of COVID, but we have people that have been traumatized by a global pandemic that is has given PTSD symptoms to people, and they don't recognize that they're just trying to go on beyond it without ever dealing with the issue. It's like having some sort of like if we were in a war and we were being like people that have evacuated different countries during war would say they had to deal with it or else it was like something else was going on and they were having all these triggers. Well, we've had to deal with overcoming and coming out of a pandemic. It's not massively discussed. We're all like, oh, life on, without realizing every time somebody says they've got COVID, we've been triggered and are remembering all the people we lost or we're remembering our own mortality because we almost died, but we don't
Mhm.
want to deal with that. So it's like trigger, 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 trigger. And we don't know why we're feeling all of this angst and can't breathe and freaking out or low frustration tolerance or difficulty enjoying the things that we used to enjoy. Like all of the symptoms of PTSD, or many of them, we don't recognize that it's linked to something that we haven't dealt with. And for me, that was employment.
Mm.
Right? For me, like anybody with when it comes to burnout, we think of employment, but when it comes to PTSD, sometimes we don't think that PTSD can come in people's form of employment, right? But for me, because I experienced chronic stress, that chronic stress meant every single time I went into the work environment, I knew that I was going to be experiencing a flood of stress hormones.
Mhm.
And when you're experiencing burnout, you start to have stress, right? So there's that honeymoon phase that you start with in a job, and then you go into stress, and then it becomes chronic stress. When you have chronic stress, that becomes debilitating because it's always activated. And the trigger is going to work. The trigger is going to work. And if you have an incident that happens at work that you don't get beyond, the trigger is every person that's involved in that incident, or every time a topic rubs up against something that if that issue were solved, you wouldn't be feeling what you're feeling, but it's not solved. So it's always activating it. And then you're getting more stress on top of the chronic stress. You're getting a flood. So you've got this drip of stress, and then you've got spikes of stress on top of it. But people aren't relating it to this job or this space or this circumstance, right?
So there are two things that I heard you say that I really don't want to let float by. But one is that people aren't relating it to these things. So how do you equip someone to start noticing?
Yeah, well, and that's the I think the challenge for people is when you're in the middle of it, you have stress brain. So that's not when you can really solve complex problems and be able to have identification. So it's challenging. So then you're not stressed and you're outside of work and you're not in that situation. That's the perfect time to start asking yourself some questions. But then because we're actually needing to regulate our nervous system, we're reluctant to ask those questions because then we start to have spikes of stress hormones and we're like, oh my God, no, I can't now not feel okay at home too. So this is my safe space. So now I'm trying to rest and recuperate. But what happens is we're in a vicious cycle of I'm okay when I'm at home. I'm not okay when I'm at work. I'm okay when I'm not at, home, or I'm okay when I'm at home. I'm not okay when I'm at work. And we get into this repeated pattern. And so the important thing, I think, is for people to acknowledge like where you're at in that honest, like to the moment that somebody says, I think I might be burnout. Or if you do, for example, if you suspect that your work situation or whatever it is, like a relationship, a group that you're involved in, whatever it is, if you notice that when you do that thing, you start to have physiological symptoms. You
Mhm.
start to get tension in your neck, or you start to get stomach aches, or you start to get a headache, or you can't sleep the night before you're going to be doing something. Then the question becomes, or I used to see people stay up super, super late and get up early, but they'd stay up late because they didn't want to have to go to bed because they knew that when they woke up, it was going to be time to go to work. And then they'd wake up early and dip themselves on their sleep. So they cut their sleep out, which is reparative and
Mhm.
you need it. So their body was getting all these stress hormones and then they needed the repair, but they couldn't go to sleep because they didn't want to have to go admit that it was time to go back to work. Right. And so stuff like that, you can start to see happen. So the first thing I think is just to ask yourself, what are my physiological symptoms related to? And at first glance, we will be reluctant to be honest with ourselves because it means that SOS, I might have a big problem here. So for me, my first thought is always, oh, burnout, stress, self care. First thing I start going into solutions, self care. Well, I was a self care queen. I would like, take care of myself every single day. I was eating good. I was working out 5 days a week. I was doing all the things. But self care, and I want people to really hear this because there's a lot of shame in the self help industry as well as just the regular population around if you're doing self care and it's not working, like somehow you're doing it wrong. But I believe that when we're stressed, that we are meant for periodic sporadic stress, and self-care can help you be okay. Self-care is not meant for a constant drip of stress. Self-care is not it's like self-care is not going to work in the long, like think about like why would we continue to take care of ourselves so that we could deplete ourselves and take care of ourselves so we can deplete ourselves. We're really meant to have something that's satisfying, that we feel engaged in, that we love doing, that pushes us, but it pushes us in all the right ways. And then periodically, bad things happen and we get really stressed. And then our self care helps us through that because we've got our reservoirs up and every day we're feeling good. like we're really managing that, like we're choosing things that we feel good in. Self-care helps in those types of situations, but it's never meant to, you can't stay up on top of every day. You're like, my life, I'm just stressed all the time, right? So self-care is number one, but then I start going into, well, let me solve the issue. If it's an issue at work, let me have communication. Let me have open communication. If it doesn't fix it though, it takes two people. If you're in an ongoing situation and somebody else is invested in keeping it the way that it is or doesn't want to take responsibility for their part, or if an organization doesn't want to or understand how they're involved in it, then literally we're saying to ourselves, if at the moment that you realize that you've done everything you can and you can't change another person, you can't have them be invested, and you can't change an organization and they don't see their part in it anymore, then you have to ask yourself, am I going to keep trying to have insight from people or a situation that isn't invested in seeing, isn't seeing this? At some point you have to just say, it's on me. Like, and for me, one of the things I recognized was that I was, number one, doing everything that I possibly could from a self-care perspective. Number two, felt really good about all the conversations that I'd had. People were aware of the situation. And then I just realized I'm being sent in a new direction and I'm not owning that. And maybe if the universe is for me, what if this is for me? What if people and situations aren't changing because I'm being softly, like I'm literally being given an invitation to move in a new direction? If situations change how you want them to, then you're staying. But what if you weren't meant to stay and you were meant to go and do something different and you're just not? And that's creating some anxiety.
Yeah, I think this gets back to the what you mentioned before we talked about. Sometimes it's more comfortable to stay in the ugly that you know versus enter the unknown. And especially if you get a temporary reprieve because you may have a conversation and they say it's going to change and they're interested in hearing what you have to say. And then that makes it even more tempting to stay in this ugly where you may actually be invited to step out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, safety is an important thing. We're biological organisms. And so safety is important. So for me, I loved being a part of something that I felt like I believed in the mission, and, it was safe in that I had a great reputation. I was making good money. I had something that I always had issues that I got to solve and be a part of. Um, but again, when it's the chronic stress, I would hear people talk about seasons. I would hear departments say, oh, it's the holiday season, so the next 3 months are going to be crazy for me. Or it was the accounting, they would have like, oh man, it's the end of month, end of year for us, and it's like March, April, and we've got to get all this stuff done. And then they would have reprieve, and I would always be like, we never get reprieve. And you'd say that and people would be like, like kind of like this impossibility. Like, like, of course, it's just part of the job. But there wasn't this understanding of the long-term impact of chronic stress being part of the job. Like, we're not trained in my field to have that be part of the stress. Like when somebody goes off the war, soldiers are trained on how to mentally. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not impacted. They're still human being, and that's why we see PTSD in soldiers, right? Same thing with when people are dealing with the ER and ER docs and stuff like that. Like there's sometimes where they're trained to do the surgeries and they're trained to diagnose, but they're not ever trained really for that chronic stress. And what I have seen with medical school is they are trained in that they're put in situations where they don't sleep and they get used to not sleeping and stuff like that, but they're not trained in a healthy way. to do that. We're trained to just deal with it, and it's part of the job, but yet nobody can take that. And so we're not talking about the long-term impact of chronic stress on human bodies. We do not have we talk about boundaries as if everybody's like, well, you got to have boundaries. And they go like this, like there's really an energetic bubble that we can put around us. And I'm like, oh, you mean to be disconnected? Um, not, not meeting somebody where they're at. I saw people be disconnected and have bubbles around them. And guess what? It would escalate people in fearful situations because it looks like you don't care. And you're protecting yourself, but that person doesn't feel met. So, how do you meet people in a traumatic situation in their life, and you're the person who's supposed to meet them at it, and you're not depleted because you're sensing that energy and you're entering into this energetic distress? How do you do that? Right? And meet that person in a human connected space
Mhm.
and have it be an efficient interaction and you're not being bled on. It's like a doctor that's supposed to do surgery without seeing and touching blood. It's like somebody's sadness and emotions is like physical blood coming out of their body. You're seeing it, you're feeling it, you're interacting with it. But we're supposed to be like, that wasn't a big deal. Not supposed to activate the stress hormones. So you saw me in that video.
Mhm.
That is not like if people were to have been on my teams or in my organization and they would have seen and they see that when they see this video, anybody who does would say, I had no idea. I had
Mhm.
no idea. Because it's interesting. With depression, we can't hide our depression. When you have a chronic mental health issue like schizophrenia or something that has a psychotic disorder and your brain's a certain way, you can't hide that. So many times with medical issues, we can't hide it. So we don't realize that when somebody's in front of us looking a certain way, we're interpreting their behavior through our lens. But if we were to pull back from our belief system and have no judgment about what it is, we might see it more holistically for what it is and say, whoa, is this person okay? Like I would have loved somebody to be like, pull me aside and say, are you okay? Can can we do something to help you out here? Instead, I felt like a couple of times I had to hit bottom and then I had to feel ashamed for asking for time so that I could be okay. It was very much like I had to gain every ounce of courage I had to go in and be like, this is where I'm at while I'm at my bottom. And
Yeah.
and and only talk about the physical symptoms, because if I talk about the
Mhm.
emotional pain, if I talked about my lack of emotional or moral safety in different situations, if I would have had to talk about that lack of safety, that wouldn't have been accepted for my time off to take care
Mhm.
of me. But it was the
Wow.
physical symptoms that I had to say in order for it, which were true. But it wouldn't be speaking other people's language if I didn't talk about the physical symptoms that were true, but I couldn't bring the moral or emotional lack of safety that was leading to the chronic stress that was bringing me to where I was. It was just like, it's like when people have diabetes or heart conditions, and some people die from those conditions and they never realize it's related to the stress from their jobs. People are walking around going, "Oh, man, can you believe that person had a heart attack?" But then everybody's talking about how stressful work is, and they don't make that connection. Yeah, yeah, stressful, especially if you're doing what you're not supposed to be doing anymore.
I do want to talk about that. I want to put a pin in that because I think this is really key, because I don't think that we can have this conversation without addressing, like, here's this elephant. Do we not want people to become medical professionals or social workers anymore? Like, who's cut out for that if everybody's getting burnt out? I'd like to talk about that, but I also want to address something that you said and that I noticed in your video, which is you said physical symptoms. And I told you, when I watched this video, you look 10 years older in this video than you look now. And this was at least 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that we see the stress on us in different ways, and we think that age is there's some part of us that thinks that age is universal and it happens just it's a necessity, and the way it happens is going to be the same no matter what. But yet there's some part of us that knows that that's not true, because we've said, how many times do we hear people say, oh, you can see there's life has really aged them. When you say life has aged somebody, what you're saying is that the number wasn't consistently giving the same thing, but that because of how hard life was, stress, they actually aged more, so they look older than what they actually are. And so usually when I see somebody who's like, I look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're only 40 years old. They look like they're 65 or 70. And when I see that, I know they've got a lot going on. And when I see that somebody, and I don't mean this with any kind of judgment, because I've been there and I know what that's like, to not know when you have that kind of brain. You're so scared. One more thing, me taking on one more thing, I feel like could tank me. So it's terrifying to take it on. But what we don't realize is it's taking stock in exactly where we are and making one decision different. The one decision that we're like, oh, if I made if I made this decision, small or big,
Mhm.
I know that I could breathe tomorrow. It's like something that makes me smile, something that makes me happy, something that makes me not feel stress. Those are all the yeses. But when we're in the middle of it, for some reason, we feel shame. Like doing something for ourselves, there's something wrong with it. When really it's the direction to go. It's like even the universe, I expect to get to the other side at some point. And, like my angels and people being like, man, you had a couple of points there. You could have like made things. I mean, I know it's not, you don't get critical, you don't get criticism on the other side. But I picture like these moments where people are just gently being with me on the other side and saying, maybe next time. But it's just a pivot that we can't see in that moment because we're so scared. You and I talk about how we're either oriented in fear or love. Those are the opposite sides of the spectrum. So I'm either believing everything's going to be okay. I totally have faith in it. I'm in love with what I'm doing and I'm staying in that space, or else I'm terrified and I do not have belief in what's happening. And I'm resisting. Every ounce of me is like, no, I've got to stay where I'm at. I've got to just like claw to stay where I'm at. So it's one of the two orientations that we're in. And there's some part of us that knows that we're in one or the other. And when we're here in the sphere orientation, we look old, we're tired, we're exhausted, we're not our best selves. And then if you're somebody who lives for the weekends, lives for the evenings, or lives for vacations, you might be this person who needs to consider, like, what can I do? What decisions can I make that would allow me just to to be and not have to constantly overcome stress? And if I were to be that person, I wonder what life could feel like. I wonder what life could be like. Do I really believe that I'm meant to be stressed and suffer all the time, and that somehow that gives me more points with whatever's happening? But sometimes we can feel like that. you
Mhm.
know? Like, we just gotta keep on at it.
I think I think our culture as a whole is getting a little bit better at accepting when people need to transition. I think that in previous generations, you just didn't. You just stuck with it. You just did. But I do think that there's going to be some resistance because I know, having personally lived it, it's one thing to say if your workplace is causing you burnout and you are this level of stressed constantly, that you've got to do something different. But it's another to be able to find that route to walk to be able to do something different, especially if you've got mouths to feed and bills to pay, and it's not just you who you're responsible for.
Yeah.
That's a whole, and like you said, when you're in this erratic brain and this fight, flight, freeze brain, you can't, it's almost physically impossible to allow yourself to go down the road of solutions because they're so scary that you just can't process that.
Mhm. Yeah. So I would, first of all, I would say anybody who's got a partner has tremendous assets
Mm.
because it allows for you to have somebody to bounce something off of, right? Um, and the important thing is to ask yourself if it's true. So for example, yeah, like I was just on my own, and sometimes people are like, oh, well, you like that's the first thing most people say when they have kids is they'll say, oh, well, you were on your own. Like somehow it was easy for me to like change my entire life because I was single, and it was like it was just me. Sometimes when I we always romanticize the other side, and when I look at parents, sometimes I'm like, you have something that pushes you innately day after day. Do you know how hard it is to be a single person and to get your motivation to find your life day after day and keep at it whenever I like there's always like some side of a story that you're like, we've got different reasons. There's like pros and cons,
Mm.
like to either side, right? But the way I look at it as like Liz Gilbert talks about how, when we have something that we want to do in our life and an idea comes through, it's our job to fund it. And I also look at it like you can apply that to happiness. The reality is that this is a fast-paced world that we live in, or it's not. It's fast-paced if we choose to allow it to be fast-paced. And it's not, and we can switch it if we choose to do that.
Mm.
And we can make up excuses for why we don't have it. But the reality is if you want a slower paced life, then it starts with slowing your brain down. And you're either going to do it or you're not. So you're going to stay in your fast paced life and you're going to stay doing something that you don't like, and you're going to die doing something that you don't like. And you're going to feel like a victim in all of it if you choose to feel like that. But the reality is that if I had kids and I wanted to do something different, what I would do is I would find a way over however many years it took to save 6 months' salary. I would make different decisions. If my kids wanted to be in 3 activities, I would let them be in two for the whole health of the whole organism. And I would say, yeah, choose whatever 2 activities you want. And I would see that it's going to take me 3 years to get out of this so that I can have 6 months' salary so that I can actually leave my job. And that decision is I'm going to not this because I trust myself that in the absence of stress, that within 6 months I'll figure out something else. My brain will become okay. And I will be the version of me that I know that I can pick up another job. There's always something else I can do. Hey, anybody out there that has lived through COVID, there's a lot of employment. It's a new world. So that old world that we lived in where the unemployment was this and you can't find any jobs, that day is done. If you want another job, they're out there. And
Mm.
so we can let that go. I could pick up any job I wanted to at any time, and some part of me knows that. So when people say, I can't do something, it reminds me of your son with the um,
Interesting.
fish tank. When he said, I can't change the fish tank, I can't do all this. But then once he had a motivation and he was like, well, I either have to figure out how to clean the fish tank or else I'm gonna not be able to do something. Suddenly he had the motivation and in 20 minutes he did it.
Mhm.
So we're our biggest barrier to something actually being able to be done. And the moment that we say, well, I wonder how I would if I were going to with 4 kids, I wonder how I would switch my what I'm doing and make it viable. It's the moment that we ask a different question that it creates a spaciousness for a new solution to come in. But until we ask, as long as we say I can't, there is no answers in sight. I can't do this. Okay. I wonder how I could do this. Allows for us to come up with some options. And then we have decisions to make and actions to do to make it happen. And then the reality is, and I say this to people all the time, the reality is if you're not willing to do anything else, then you'll just keep getting your life, and that's okay too. I mean, it's a pretty good life out here. We're not living in medieval times. Some pretty good things are happening. We're pretty safe for the most part. If nothing else, if we would just change our perspective about what we have, we could be okay with the life we have. But the reality is if we're going to accept stress, we're going to keep dealing with situations that we don't want, and we're not going to allow ourselves to have an open mindset of like solutions that don't make us do something different. Of course, you're going to have to do something different. You want something different.
Mm.
You want something different. So instead of trying to change people or organizations or your job, why don't you just change you? And it starts with an openness to, I wonder what it could look like. And I wonder, like, once I allow myself to be open to that, there's always solutions that come with it. We talk about that. Every problem comes with its own innate solutions, trucking right along with it. It's just, do we see it?
All right. So I'm curious, you record this video. At that point, what question did you ask yourself? And how long did it take for you to finally live into that answer?
Mhm. Well, let me look and see real quick what the video date was, because I think this is important. I want to give as accurate of an answer as possible. This video was September 3rd, 2020, and I left in May of 2021. Is it May of 2021 or May of 2022? It was May. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, I left in 2021. So this was like
8
8 months,
months.
but I gave my notice 6 months after this
Okay.
video. For me, it was that when I looked at myself in this video, my neck was super thin. I was like gaunt looking, like I looked bad. I saw myself and I got a little scared. And I remembered my heart issues and like I got just enough distance to where, okay, so this was in 2019, May 2019, I took that 7-week trip overseas. I thought when I came back, I was going to leave
Mm.
because I had a vision. Like I had like God tell me, leave your job and write the book. And I hadn't. So some part of me knew a year later, 14 months later, I hadn't done what I've been told. And I knew that when I didn't do what I was told to do, but I was asking for something different, it's like
Mm.
I'm appealing and the universe is like, okay, do something. Then what happens is if I'm still appealing, I get taken out. Like I start to tank and I could see it on me. I was like, the excitement from the year before was wearing off. I'm now like crying on a video. I've lost weight. I'm the lowest weight that I've been in the longest time. Like I'm like at 120 pounds at that point. I might have even been 115. Like I was thin. And I should be 20, 25 pounds heavier than that at my healthiest. So I was feeling tired and fatigued, busy. And so it took me 6 months after that because finally, you know what finally clicked with me? I started going deep in cultivating my relationship with God. I was like, why can't I have faith that it's going to be okay? And what I finally decided was in those conversations, I started walking and like not listening to music and just having conversations, just being present, like recognizing that I was always praying to God, but I wasn't listening.
Mhm.
And I was like, I got down to, do you believe what you were told? And I was like, yeah, I do believe that I'm supposed to leave my job and write a book. Now, it didn't say I couldn't go to another job or do something, just leave your job and write a book. And I was like, do you believe that? And I was like, yes. So God is asking you to leave your job and do something different. Why aren't you doing it? And then I was like, but people need me here. I'm really good at this. This is like something that like everybody's like, look at how important this is. And then I was like, oh, you're saying that the organization, the people that work there, the clients that are there are more important than what God's asking you to do. That's what you're saying. Is that what everybody else wants you to do is more important than what God wants you to do? Or what I want to do is more important. Like, what if I know something that is going to really align with you and I'm trying to put you in this direction? But what you're saying is that what you want to do and what other people want you to do is more important than what I want you to do. And by the way, now I realize that not only is what God wants me to do a real thing, but it's also like it always aligns with like something that's going to light me up. It's not going to be something that depletes me.
Mhm.
It's going to be something I'm completely been cultivated to be and respond to. So the moment that I am not the version of me that sees the like excitement in something and I'm depleted all the time and I'm triggered and all this, then I'm being invited in a new direction. And the universe is going to find a direction that aligns with what energizes me because God is about cosmic energy and high energy. So if I'm supposed to align with high energy, then what I'm doing is at a high energy. I'm not aligned with what I'm supposed to do if I'm depleted all the time.
Mhm.
And once I hit that realization, I was like, I'm out. Oh my God. So I had that realization and then I was like, I'm gonna know the right time to do it. I just trust. And then I woke up one day and I didn't even know I was gonna resign. I woke up one day and literally, Bridget, 20 things happened. I got people were texting me things that I was like, oh my gosh. I got like somebody called me to share something. I don't know why I'm telling you this. It was literally 20 things before 9 a.m. And I go, today's the day. I got goosebumps. I was all excited. I was like, oh my God, today's the day. And I just got so calm about it because I knew that this had the quality that I could trust, that this had God all over it. I was like, "Oh my God, this is the day." So just then I trusted, but I had cultivated over like months that conversation
Yeah.
of what do you want me to do? How do you want me to serve? What if I'm open? And then I was like, but am I open? Because I kind of got a way that I wanted to happen. I want things to change here so I can stay here. I like it here. But I'm sending you in a new direction. You're going to like it, you know? So you look at me now and I look like what? How many years younger than that video 4 years ago?
10 years younger.
So I look 14 years younger. Like in that video, to if you were add the 4 years and 10 years, like somewhere between 10 and 14 years younger.
Yeah.
Wow. And that's just happiness,
Vital energy.
vital energy, a commitment every single day to continuing to do that which is mine to do. I'm not burnout. Now, I will say the PTSD, you know, if I think about going into an organization, I start to have my throat close up and I start to like, and I have to pivot because it is like PTSD is a real thing. So I'm not using that to describe the symptoms. Like PTSD is a long-standing chronic issue that when you are put in environments or triggered in some way, that you will have those symptoms come up on their own because it's linked to a whole cord of symptoms that are debilitating. Then you have to make some decisions about like what you can and can't do in life. You know, there are people who can't go back into situations that they were in that caused it because it can bring up a lot of other feelings. So
So I want to dip back into what we began to talk about earlier, which is, okay, so this is like multi-pronged. What's going to prevent burnout? Is it inevitable that everyone's going to experience it? And what are we saying here? Are we saying just don't enter these high stress professions where a lot of people get burnt out because that's dangerous, or what are some palatable solutions that we could offer?
I think that, okay, so we know that 87% of people who enter in the human service field have had some sort of trauma. I know that I could never enter into a field directly and work directly with the trauma that I had when I was younger as the main thing that I'm dealing with. Now, that's just me. And I had done a lot of work on myself. And I was still like, I'm not willing to every day deal with the things that happen, that are happening to other people that happen to me, because that will be a trigger. Right. So I think awareness in how realistic is it to day in and day out every single day do something that's related to something that traumatized you, number one. Number two, I'm always like the first 5 years of any job, um, pretty solid. Like even like I can still, so I think there's a time that happens. There's also an injury that can happen, a very specific injury that if you don't get past, that it can be, you can start to see some symptoms. So I think going into any situation, when you start a job, talk to a family member, a spouse, your best friend, somebody that you trust, and make sure that they know if I start to see, if you start to see signs in me that something's off or that I'm not okay, will you sit down and talk to me about that? Because sometimes I may not see that before you see it. And I want to catch those warning signs early. And so understanding what early warning signs, which it's well documented, again, this episode is not about regurgitating all of the well-known symptoms, what burnout is, chronic stress symptoms, PTSD, you can look that stuff up. But if you identify some early warning signs of these things, that's when you want to catch it, because your brain isn't full on dumping chronic stress hormones. You want to catch it when it becomes stress and not chronic stress. You want to catch it when you're starting to notice that, I don't know why, but I don't want to go to work today. It could be that it's the type of work that you're doing on certain days. You might be able to switch your job. There were times that I had that I would switch my position in different organizations and I had new challenges. I was done with those old challenges. They were stressful. I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to give fresh energy to somebody else to deal with those because now they were like all in, right? I'd done this, done that, done this, done that. I'm out of ideas. Somebody else take it. So some of it is just moving where you're at and getting into a spot that works on your strengths and what you really enjoy as part of your job, and making sure sometimes organizations, because you're good at something, will get you involved in something that they want you to do it, but you don't want to do it. I can't tell you how many times I've been in spaces where somebody said, um, we want you to do this because we know you'll be good at it. And the person was like this, I don't want to do that. And they had to do it and they just got it added on as their job. That is a recipe for burnout. If you don't want to do something and you're not energized by it, but somebody's just trying to solve their own problem and put it on you, if you don't want to do it, it's going to be a slow burnout, right? Because it's not something that you're energized by. There's the part of you, your initial response is the part of you that knows that it's not for you. Otherwise, what do you do when you get something added to you? You go, yes. You're like, yes. Oh my God, I've been wanting to do that. That's who you want on that team. When you assign somebody and you're like, hey, I just need to get it off me. I'm going to put it on somebody else. And I know they got a lot on their plate. They tell me they have a lot on your plate, but I'm going to give you more. It's going to be something that your initial response is, I don't want to do this. Bad idea. So as an organization, take responsibility for, I actually want to align this in a way that it's healthy for the person. And if it's something, this is huge. I'm going to say this is huge. If you are an organization who has lots of issues in your community and you're like, but we want to make sure that these people are helped. This group of people isn't getting helped. And if we don't do it, nobody else will do it. Not okay to take it on and put it on the same people that are already overwhelmed right now. Decide how you're going to, in health, create something first, an infrastructure. And then when you create the jobs in the infrastructure, then bring it on. But don't say I'm going to put it on somebody else for 6 months to a year until we figure out how we're going to fund it and then we're going to build it. Because literally people are going to throw whatever's left that they have in their tank at a solution, and it's going to be a partial solution. And it's your own dang fault for knowing that you're putting people in that position. I'm just going to say it. And it's a stressed organization that puts the stress on it. It's a parallel process is what we call it. We start to see the same types of symptoms, and a collective disturbance, like those two terms. If you're not aware of it, you start to see organisms, the larger system and the individual starting to mirror the same types of issues. And that's when you need to say, slow down, take a break, rest. Let's take some stock so that everybody's okay, that we're okay. And I will say, I do want to say, I believe that organizations that serve people have such big hearts. They're doing the best they can, and they're like, it's insulting the amount of underfunding that we have for education and human services and all of those things, but we can pay basketball players like billions of dollars, right? Because you make us laugh and we love it. We feel a sense of belonging and it's fun, right? But you've got people in distress and we're just throwing scraps at them. So I also want to say that I've had the benefit of working in two amazing organizations. And I will say places are doing the best they can. But there is, I believe, this is my passion, is to find a sustainable way to serve others in a compassionate way that doesn't kill and slowly deplete the workers that are in those industries, as well as I will include not just human services but education. We pay people a lot of money to do a lot of other things, but we're not paying people um, to be able to serve people in a way that allows for them to be the best version of them. They don't even have the money to do the things that would take care of them to be the best version of them, you know? So
What's it like being 4 years out from that video now?
I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Like I'm not kidding you when I say I knew in that video that if I didn't do something different, I would have died. Like I know that it would have been some whatever they put on a death certificate that wasn't true, but it would have made everybody happy. Nobody had to deal with their part in it. Um, but the reality is that when I look at myself, then I'm so grateful that I took the chance to build a life that I love. And it took what's the one thing I know? The one thing I know is not this. Okay, I started there. What's the other thing I know? I don't want to live here anymore. I want to go somewhere where I belong. I feel included. I'm not just tolerated. I'm like, people are like, who are you? Instead of like this blinders. So knowing that my first yes was not this, my second yes was where, and I did that. Once I moved here, then I was like, well, I want I want to do the thing. So I start finding my community. I start going out. I start saying, well, what do I love? I love art. What do I love? I love hiking. What I met people on hiking trails that are friends now. I've met people in galleries that are some of my best friends now. Every place that's my emphatic yes, I have met people that have swam alongside me. And it's like now I have a community that is like they're like-minded in our yeses. And so we literally are connected in this really vibrant way. Then I'm like, okay, well, this door isn't opening. So what else do I do? What's my yes? And every time there's always one thing that I can do, which is manageable. And then I do that thing. And then all of a sudden, you've created a life you love because you refuse to do anything that depletes you. Like it's crazy. Like I've had friends and people that I knew that every time I was around them, like, it's okay if every once in a while you've got some things to complain on, but if every time I'm around you, you're complaining, you're like, I don't want to do that all the time. Like, I just don't, and some people will be like, well, that's not very nice. You're not like, you know what? Again, my job is to be the best version of me. And if God has given me this body, mind, and spirit to be the highest version of me, if I'm choosing this person over here, who, by the way, isn't getting better by me commiserating with them, and I'm enabling them. So I'm enabling them and I'm being depleted. So I'm saying that that person is more important than what God's got me here to do. I'm supposed to be turned on, excited, vibrant, so that I can do what I'm here to do. That's my job. And so it doesn't mean I don't stretch myself from a compassionate lens, but the moment that I'm depleted and it's at my expense and it's not helpful to the situation, I have to ask myself some hard questions. You think it's easy for me to leave behind people that I love and care about? No, but it's what's right when it's not helpful to them or you.
Mm.
And you've gotten into a cycle that keeps you depleted and away from our best selves. Best thing I can do for you is release you also. Maybe you'll figure out a different way to handle the issues because you're offloading it in a way that's not helpful long term. You know, did I answer your question? I went on the whole thing.
A couple things I heard. It's about not just caring for the highest expression of yourself, but also being willing to see and care for the highest expression of other people's selves, even if that includes an organization's self as a whole.
Mhm.
It's being willing to take the steps that care for all of those things. And it is possible to do that with everyone in mind.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I want to reflect is it's such a beautiful thing to me that you went along this journey and people are now getting to see the beginning and where you are now. But you
Mhm.
didn't just do that and say, hey, look, I did it. You created a framework. You followed these specific steps and you found these specific tools and you gift that to people through your work now.
Yeah.
You didn't just do it, but now you're offering a hand to others.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
so beautiful.
Thanks. It was important for me that I happened to find my way out and I'm super grateful, but I also recognize that just as easily as I did, I could have not.
Yeah.
And I have a tremendous amount of compassion for other people who are still trying to find out how do I find my happiness, whether it's one part of their life or all parts of their life. But I feel like people feel really disempowered, and it's just not true. We have so much power at our disposal, and we have so many capabilities if we are willing to be really myopic and stay in our lane and just focus on ourselves and our families and what that means. And honestly, like I remember before I left, and this is really important, and I want to bring it up in here. I said to myself when I left my situation, I could be wrong. What if I'm trying to change this situation with this amazing place and situations that I was in, and I'm taking the wrong tact? Well, then the best thing I can do if I can't see that there's another way is to remove myself from the situation so that they can go along and do their business and I can go along and do something new, but we can both be free. I'm okay being wrong. Like that doesn't scare me. I've been wrong. If you're a leader, you're used to being wrong. You got to be wrong a lot before you're right. So that doesn't scare me. And I care so much about the mission that I'm willing, if I'm in the way, I want out. And if there's something I'm meant to do, I want to find that. But some part of me knew that because I'd seen it in 2019 and I knew what it felt like to breathe and feel good, some part of me knew that we weren't just supposed to feel that in retirement, that we were supposed to live every day finding our emphatic yes with the people that we love, with our spouses, with our partners, with our friend groups, with our family, with our work, with our purpose. What if we really are supposed to be an emphatic yes on everything and we're the only ones who say that we're not? And when we say, well, I wonder, you know as well as I do, it makes it true. It's possible. So make one yes. We know the one decision and we want the whole route. We want the whole road, but we sometimes just know the next right step. And if you just take that next right step, the next right step will come up and the next right step. And the next thing you know, you're in a life you love. And you're like, how'd I get here? One step at a time. It's how we all get anywhere. But we have this illusion that we got it all. Like we did it the whole way and we knew the whole way, but we never know the whole way.
This was your story. So do you feel
Yeah,
like
what's that?
yeah, no, I just want to make sure that you feel like you've been able to tell the whole story that you wanted to.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I feel like the last thing I just want to say is if you have moments that you see yourself and you identify with this video, or maybe you know that if you were honest with yourself and you allowed yourself to feel the full emotion of what you're experiencing, that you would be sobbing too. Like it's so hard and you just don't want to do it anymore. I really believe that when it's so hard and we just don't want to do it anymore, it is a moment and it's an opportunity for us to go in a direction that surpasses our most remote capacity to see how amazing it is. And I believe that we're meant to do something in this world that feels good and contributes in a way that you can't help but see God in us because of how we're operating. And if you don't feel like you're that version of you, I would just encourage you to ask yourself some questions. The right questions can take you far. And once you know them, you can't unknow them. And once you know them, then I would say get a team together, get some people together if you can't find a way to do it yourself. Find a way to get into a different situation, one decision at a time, and then celebrate how different it feels and watch how your energy changes with one decision at a time. You deserve to be happy. I'm so grateful that I made a different decision because I wouldn't have this life that I do now. I can't even fathom staying in that life. Like I literally, this is the last thing I'm going to say. I literally would not have the life I have. Like that blows my mind. I would not have the life I have if I'd chosen in the life I was in. And I cannot imagine passing on what I'm experiencing.
Hmm.
I cannot imagine passing on what I'm experiencing in this life. I just, like, I literally am like, holy cow. if I hadn't have made that one decision, I would not be here. It's worth it. Just believe people deserve to be happy. And when you say it doesn't have to be this hard, you're right, it doesn't. That's all I got. So thank you guys for listening today. I would love to hear what click moments that you had for yourself in this episode. I understand that requires a lot of vulnerability. So feel free to shoot me an email if you do not feel ready yet to share this with other people. But I would love to hear how and if it resonates with you and in what ways. And thank you, Bridget, for coming on here and just helping me process and asking some really good questions that gets this topic out. I always appreciate your commitment to sharing what we have to share with people. So thank you. All right, so a special thanks to Micah McKenzie, who did the incredible cover art for Click Moments. And until next time, friends, peace, love, and light.
Do with these words what you will. It's time for us to be for real. You'll be stuck on the ground until you finally break the shell.